So Donald Trump has wrapped up his summit with China's Xi Jinping, hailing some supposedly fantastic trade deals struck during the trip. Trump headed home upbeat after all the pageantry, but details are sketchy as to what was actually achieved. There was no formal signings of business agreements. Trump was flanked by tech industry heavyweights on the trip, including Apple CEO Tim Cook, Tesla and SpaceX boss Elon Musk, and Jensen Huang, the founder of the AI titan Nvidia, the world's most valuable company. So what exactly did these tech elder bros bring to the party? That's exactly what I want to ask Paul Triolo, a partner at DGA-Albright Stonebridge Group and one of the foremost experts on China's semiconductor industry and tech landscape, more generally speaking. Paul, really great to have you here. It was already a powerful collection of tech leaders heading to Beijing, but when the plane stopped for fuel and picked up Nvidia boss Jensen Huang, then we had a dinner party at Xi's. Who wanted him there more, Trump or Xi?
Great question. I think clearly Trump wanted him there more. So, look, when you look at this group of tech executives that were here, they all have slightly different issues in China, which I think is maybe useful to cover here. But of course, the reason Jensen Huang was not originally on the invite list was because he is not viewed that favorably in certain quarters in Washington. His main ally, previously former White House AI and crypto czar David Sachs, left the administration about a month and a half ago. And Sachs had pushed for Jensen Huang to meet with the president and make his case about, for example, selling H200 semiconductors to China. But after Sachs left the administration, the other cabinet members are not as high on Jensen, so he was left off the list. But the president really likes him. He believes that Jensen's company, of course, is one of the best companies in the U.S., and so he pushed for Jensen to join the trip, and hence the last-minute hijinks and the flight to Anchorage to jump onto the Airforce One there, which has generated some very amusing memes.
Yeah, Paul, you definitely know things are going well for your career when Air Force One stops to pick you up along the way to China. Just on that note, as far as chips are concerned, am I right in saying the US wanted to place restrictions on which chips Nvidia were allowed to sell to China, but also that China were not entirely keen on Chinese companies relying on Nvidia chips, whether they were outdated models or not? Is that right?
Well, you've got it mostly right, yes. So there's objections on both sides of the Pacific to this decision that President Trump made in December to allow shipments of H200 class GPUs. This is a semiconductor that Nvidia first introduced in, I think, 2004. So it's not really outdated. It's quite useful, for example, for inference, for running applications, AI applications at scale in the cloud. And so many Chinese companies actually want these. So you have a weird situation where both Nvidia and the Chinese companies want to see flows of these semiconductors to China, but the governments on both sides each have their differences. And so here in the U.S., the president wants this, but many of the China hawks, for example, in Congress and in the administration, and former Biden administrations officials who architected the export controls, they're saying any shipment of AI-capable semiconductors to China should be banned because that will assist Chinese companies in developing more advanced AI. On the Chinese side, you're correct. The Chinese government would like to see Chinese companies use domestic alternatives, particularly from Huawei. The only problem is those domestic alternatives are both short in supply and not really equivalent completely to these Nvidia processors, even though they're not the cutting edge. Most of the Chinese AI development community, for example, was trained on Nvidia hardware, knows how to use it very well, and so they're very eager to get their hands on these chips. But at the same time, we're in the midst of a transition domestically where Huawei, and using its partner, the domestic foundry SMIC, is ramping up production of its AI hardware over the next year in particular. And so there will be some relief for Chinese companies. But for the moment, it would be great, in their view, to get their hands on some of these H200s because their demand they're seeing out there for AI applications, just like with U.S. AI companies, is going through the roof.
So Nvidia was the headline act, I guess, but the boss was just one of the tech leaders in Beijing. Let's have a listen to a few of them now before we keep going.
Yeah, I think it's very strong. I think that people are very excited about AI and new technology here and embrace it very readily. And I couldn't be more excited about it.
Well, we're very optimistic in GE Aerospace, given the growth in commercial aviation in China. We're pleased to be here in the role that we play.
The Chinese economy has a very good outlook. I think it's a very dynamic economy, and I think it has a very good outlook at it.
China's laid out a very straightforward, ambitious 5-year plan. It's 15th 5-year plan. And, my expectation is China will continue to make more progress, more economic growth as they execute this next 5-year plan.
So as to what this summit achieves, China leads the world in 66 of the 74 critical technologies, roughly 90% of the areas tracked. That's according, I might say, to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. The prominent Australian think tank's critical technology tracker reveals, it says the US trails significantly, leading in only 8 fields. Off the back of that, is China catching up to the world on chip making? Is that progress inevitable for them, or does this summit and the gaggle of tech bros tell us that they are not catching up so fast where it's most important in this field?
Great question. Well, look, I mean, the tech bros here are not really, with a few exceptions, in the semiconductor space, except for Nvidia. And of course, Coherent is a key supplier of photonics, which is a key input to the broader data center and AI data center landscape. But look, the Chinese semiconductor industry domestically has been struggling under U.S. export controls for more than 4 years, and it has adjusted significantly. And so over the last 4 years, the Chinese front-end manufacturers, for example, SMIC, and the tool makers that are domestic leaders, such as Naura and AMEC and others, they've come up the learning curve really fast because they've had to, because of the U.S. export controls. So can they duplicate the most advanced semiconductors that are by the way, produced primarily at TSMC in Taiwan and Samsung in Korea and Intel, the U.S. company? Can Chinese companies match the technology of those other leaders? No, not yet. They've had 4 years to try to adjust to the reality that they're not going to get access to those, for example, the most advanced tools, but they're making great progress. So is it inevitable that they'll catch up? At this point, they don't really need to catch up. They need to develop capabilities that are almost as good across the board. And actually, the big thing is capacity, because as the demand for AI and memory in particular goes up, the Chinese companies have to step up. The memory makers, for example, CXMT and YMTC in China, are very capable, and they've come from basically nowhere in the last 4 years, and to landing a pretty good market share in both NAND and DRAM. So it's a relative thing. By the end of the decade, China will have a much greater capacity to produce both mature node semiconductors and some at the cutting edge, but certainly not the level and volume that the Western companies have access to, because they can use companies like TSMC and Samsung to manufacture their designs.
Yeah, that China doesn't need to catch up is a fascinating take, taken in context, of course. One other thing I want to run past you is that China has been, you talk about acquiring knowledge. They've been famously good at acquiring knowledge from companies that go there to set up business, or so say the German automakers. Many say Apple built the iPhone in China and Endeavour, which in turn built Huawei. I wonder, do those American concerns remain for American companies doing business in China in the modern context?
That's a great question. I mean, you're referring to past examples where the price of admission to the China market was some degree of technology transfer. That was typically still it was sometimes forced, and other times companies were willing to provide some technology as a price for market entry. But most of those companies that are on, for example, too, like Tesla and Apple, they're very good at protecting their core IP, and so they're and Qualcomm. So, for example, all those companies still retain some pretty good market share in China in their respective sectors. So the issue of tech transfer is complicated. I think less important now. More important is market access, and not the Chinese government also providing subsidies to competitors. That's probably one of the biggest concerns of those U.S. companies. I would say subsidies are probably more important issue now than technology transfer. But let me make one other quick point. You noted in terms of those other CEOs that came on the trip, I think it's important to just bring in the issue of rare earths, because the reason, for example, that the Coherent CEO who you had on an interview there is in China is because most of those companies, including Tesla and the others, also somewhere in their supply chains need to retain access to Chinese rare earths and magnets. Now, we worked with this issue every day with our clients, because even though there's been some agreement around licensing of these materials, China has still been slow to license particularly rare earths, certain materials and magnets to U.S. end users, and also companies in Germany and other places. So this is a huge issue. And so I think probably on the agenda, even though it was noted that it wasn't a big issue, but it has been the main issue of all the previous trade talks, was how to improve the process for Western companies to get access to these critical materials that they need for their businesses. And the auto industry is a big user, for example, including in Germany, of rare earth magnets. And so that's definitely an issue that was on the agenda. It sounds like they didn't devote a lot of attention to it, but it's an issue that's not going away anytime soon. And I think all of the companies there, and particularly Coherent, which is suffering from a lack of indium phosphide, which is a critical mineral that's used for photonics, for example, is really an important issue. And that's why the Coherent CEO was there, because China controls 70 to 80% of the world's supply of indium. So all these issues are at play here. It's not just AI. It's not just market access. It's really critical supply chains for critical minerals and rare earths.
Trump has taken some hits over the way he's handled the Iran war, certainly on this side of the world. When he says jump, do these older tech boys and big company leaders still say how high?
Look, I think the business community is attempting to determine, how Trump comes down on different policy areas. Some of his policies, for example, in the case of Iran, have resulted in severe supply chain disruptions. Things like, energy supplies, but other critical things like urea for fertilizers, and even things like tungsten, which is less given less attention, but is critical in manufacturing semiconductors and other industrial products. So the tech bros in the U.S. have had a lot of access in Washington through people, as I mentioned earlier, like the former White House AI czar David Sachs, and so they're still very supportive in general of Trump's policies related to technology and AI in particular, where he's pushing for the rapid development in the U.S. of AI infrastructure and onshoring semiconductors. But this is a very volatile and difficult situation, because some of his policies that were not expected, like the war in Iran, have also created major problems for the business community.
Paul, just one more before we go. If you had to, even though we don't know a great deal about the deals that were signed, was it worth it? Do we know? Is there any way we have of knowing? How do you read the room? Was it worth it?
Well, look, I think the better way to look at this was not just a one-off meeting with Xi, between Xi and Trump, where somebody came away with a win or not. It's part of a broader upping of the engagement. This was the first time a U.S. president had been to Beijing in almost 10 years, right? But it's the first of several meetings this year. There'll be another meeting in September. Trump invited Xi to the White House in September. They may meet again on the sidelines of meetings at APEC and the G20. And then Xi will probably come to the White House or Mar-a-Lago later in the year, December. So I think it's better to look at this not as, who won, who lost, but as an attempt to continue to stabilize the relationship, which is still quite fragile because of all these issues like rare earths and export controls. But this was definitely a sort of less than the expectations were low, and it exceeded those low expectations because I don't think the preparation was substantial enough. If you remember, Trump was distracted by Iran, and there was really not as much preparation as normally would go into such a big state-level meeting here. So it's not unexpected that the outcome was sort of, I don't want to say a nothing burger, but it was not very substantial. But there was a lot of pageantry, and she hosted Trump in Zhongnanhai, the leadership compound, which is very rare for Chinese leaders to do. So there were some positives. Overall, the vibe was positive, but the substance was pretty thin. And in fact, the final thing I'll say is the big issue here is the truce that was reached in Busan last year to hold in abeyance two major export control packages on both sides. On the U.S. side, the so-called affiliates rule, and on the Chinese side, more rare earth controls. And so they didn't apparently agree to extend that yet. They have until November when the agreement expires, but that's huge. That could be yet another major disruption of supply chains, including for Europe, if those measures, for example, were to go forward. So we were very surprised that even that wasn't resolved as a deliverable here. But we'll find out in the coming days, what sorts of things were actually agreed to and what the next steps are in preparation for the next meeting, which hopefully will be a little more in depth and result in more clear deliverables.
Good start, but more to do. Paul Triolo, great to get your perspective. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we want to hear your thoughts now on all of this. Did Trump's trip to China with a posse of tech heavyweights really achieve anything? Leave your comments below. And of course, if you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. You've made it this far in the video. Why not? I'm Anthony Howard. That's all for now.